Hello everyone, I am Left, and welcome to the ultimate crowd control field guide for Vainglory as of 2.4, including every single hero in the game with a certain crowd control type ability and what it does, things like that. We're going to be talking today about the difference between hard and soft CC crowd control. Just learn right now that CC means crowd control. I'm going to be saying that a lot. The threat level for blocking certain crowd control, and who should be blocking that certain crowd control. So, this is going to be probably the last video I make before I graduate high school, so yay, congrats me. That's going to be next week Tuesday, so yeah, without further ado, let's start talking about the difference between hard and soft crowd control. So first off, I want to tell you guys about what hard crowd control is. These aren't really super well-known and accepted terms in the community and in the high elo, sphere of Vainglory. I kind of just made them up. I don't know if anybody else has been using them, but I kind of just made them up for this video, and they seem to work just fine. So hard CC is high priority. So it's something that if you have it, you want to be using in a fight. If it's coming at you, you should always be blocking it if possible, and it's usually medium to high movement impairment, and it's pretty easy to land or usually not missed. Either that or it's just devastating if you land it. So an example of hard crowd control would be, say, Glaive's Afterburn, or Arden's Gauntlet, or Baptiste's Ordained ability, or maybe even, Celeste's Core Collapse would be hard crowd control. Things like that, things that will almost always cause a stun, things that will cripple you in a fight, things that you really don't want to get hit with or else you should be blocking them. So now let's talk about soft crowd control and how it is different from hard crowd control. Soft crowd control is the term that I have given to things that are easy to dodge, have a low blocking priority, negligible movement impairment, and really just don't really need to be blocked unless, so this part is going to be true for a lot of the soft crowd control I talk about today. You only really want to be going for a block on this stuff if you're trying to escape on low health and it's going to hit you. So an example of soft crowd control would be like Flicker's Binding Light ability. It's really easy to dodge. The root, even if you do get hit by it, the root is not very long at all. Another example of soft crowd control would be Rona's Into the Fray. It causes a considerable but not very long-lasting slow when you walk upon the ruptured ground. So if you want to determine whether or not something is hard or soft crowd control, just ask yourself, would I use a block on this considering other abilities that are at play in the game? So say the enemy team has like a Catherine, and then they have maybe a Flicker. I know those probably wouldn't be on the same team in a ranked match, but say if there's a Catherine and a Flicker, ask yourself, would I use my reflex block on Binding Light and then get hit by Blast Tremor because I used my reflex block on Binding Light? No, you would save your reflex block for Blast Tremor because Blast Tremor is hard crowd control and Binding Light is soft crowd control. They just have different priority levels when you're trying to block them. So, have a humongous list here of every single ability, ultimate, perk in the game that I consider to be crowd control. We're going to be talking about every single one today. It's going to be a long video, and we're going to have before you see each one in game, we're going to have a little slide that gives you the threat level of each one, who should be blocking it, and just a little bit about it. And I'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'll just show you a little portion of a fast-forwarded me testing it. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into this in alphabetical order. So first, we're going to be talking about Adagio's soft crowd control of Gift of Fire. It's a pretty heavy but very brief slow when it's casted on himself, near you. The threat level I've given to this one is 3 out of 10 because you don't really need to block it just because of how quickly it dissipates. The person that would block this would be the carry, but you should only be blocking this if other dangerous crowd control has already been used in a fight. Next is going to be Adagio's hard crowd control, Verse of Judgment. Verse of Judgment is a very long stun if you are burning with Arcane Fire, and it deals immense crystal power damage. I've given this one a threat level of 10 out of 10, because if your whole team gets stunned by Verse of Judgment in the middle of a fight, you will lose the fight. It's as simple as that. Every single time, you gotta block Verse of Judgment. The person that will be blocking this would be the roamer with his Crucible, with the exception of maybe if the enemy team has a Finn and a carry Adagio, and you already used your Crucible to block a hook. So threat level, basically maxed out on Verse of Judgment, you always want to be blocking this, and it will be the captain or the roamer or the support blocking this with his Crucible. Next, let's move on to Alpha, and Alpha has one form of soft crowd control in her Prime Directive. It's a slight and brief slow to the person that she scans, or to everyone that she scans in a line, giving it a threat level of 1 out of 10, because there's really no benefit to blocking it. It's going to hit you no matter what. A proposed change that I would actually give to Prime Directive is that if the enemy team reflex blocks the little laser that comes out of Alpha's eye, Prime Directive should be cancelled. I just think that would make sense. But overall, nobody blocks Prime Directive. Why would you? I mean, unless you're like running away on really low health and it would help you, but really, don't block Prime Directive. Next, let's talk Vanguard and Gauntlet, Arden's two forms of crowd control, soft and hard respectively. So, soft crowd control would be the Vanguard because it is basically just a short slow to any enemies in the area as the Vanguard is casted. I've given it a threat level of 1 out of 10 because it doesn't really last very long and it doesn't usually matter unless you're doing early ganks, so no one blocks this. Next is going to be Gauntlet. Gauntlet, I've given it a threat level of an 8 out of 10 because it is an area that you cannot go through without being stunned or blocking. The carry should be blocking Gauntlet with his reflex block. It is an 8 out of 10 threat level I've given it, and that just means it's very dangerous and it could be fight deciding if you don't block it. However, if the Gauntlet is coming down on one or more heroes on your team, the captain might consider blocking the initial impact with his Crucible. Now let's talk about Baptiste, going in alphabetical order. So first we're going to talk about Bad Mojo. Bad Mojo is Baptiste's A. It's a pretty heavy but brief slow in the middle of it. I would say 4 out of 10 threat level because while it is a decent slow, there are very much more important things to block on Baptiste. Next, let's talk about Ordained, his B skill. This is hard crowd control and it's an area stun like a very small gauntlet. I've given this one a threat level of 6 out of 10 because depending on your situation, it's sometimes even better just to stay inside the Ordained area because it doesn't last very long. So you're almost better off just staying in it and not using your block and using it on the ultimate instead. Last one is his hard crowd control of Fearsome Shade. It fears you in a direction, and I would give this one a threat level of 8 out of 10, and I would hope that the captain uses his Crucible on it because it can be crippling in a fight. So many ultimates that Fearsome Shade can cancel, I just can't even list them here. So let's take a look at what they all do in a practice match. Blackfeather has one form of soft crowd control, and that would be his On Point. It is a decently short slow, threat level 1 out of 10. You shouldn't really be blocking this unless you're trying to escape on low health, although it's worth mentioning the more Heartthrob stacks you have on you, the longer it slows you for, but still, even if you have max stacks, it's still pretty short. Baron has one form of soft crowd control, and that would be his Porcupine Mortar. It is an area slow to anybody that's caught in it, and that slow scales with weapon power. Now it can get pretty powerful, but not really until late game, so I've given it a threat level of 3 out of 10 because there are usually going to be more important things to block against a Baron comp. Catherine has two forms of crowd control, both of them hard. The first one is Merciless Pursuit, which is a short but very reliable stun. I would give this a 7 out of 10 priority threat level, and the blocking would usually fall to the carry. This would be because the carry is usually the one targeted with Merciless Pursuit, and it doesn't really make sense to waste Crucible when Catherine has her obvious ability of Blast Tremor. As I just said, Blast Tremor is Catherine's second crowd control ability, and it is a very large area silence. This is a threat level of 10 out of 10. You must block this every time, and it must be the roamer blocking it with the Crucible. It is very hard to time, so no worries if you have trouble blocking this. I have trouble blocking this myself. I'm lucky we don't see more Catherine in ranked matches, so always block Blast Tremor. Celeste has one form of hard crowd control in her Core Collapse. It is a short area stun with a delay before activation. I've given it a threat level of 8 out of 10 because usually Core Collapse sets her up to deal a lot of damage with either a Supernova or her Solar Storm. So the carry should be blocking Core Collapse with their Reflex block in order to kite around Celeste and make it harder for you to hit her. Make it harder for her to hit you. Because when Celeste goes for a Core Collapse, it's because she wants to either lock down a mobile target or set you up to be exploded by her other skills. So blocking Core Collapse just makes it that much harder for her to deal a killing blow to you. Flicker's Binding Light is soft crowd control. It's a short route with a delayed activation, and I've given it a threat level of 4 out of 10 because, honestly, you should never actually be letting yourself get rooted by this thing because it has such a long delay and it's so small. So, seriously, just don't even waste your time with this. Just don't step on it. Flicker's Fairy Dust is hard crowd control, even though it's actually not a stun. It's a heavy area slow around him, and I've given it a threat level of 7 out of 10. Although, it's not actually usually worth blocking. Because it's a damage over time slow, you're better off just trying to stay away from Flicker and escape from it instead, because blocking it will only block a little bit of the duration. Glaive's Afterburn is a directed punt and stun. I would give this a threat level of 9 out of 10, and the carry should always be blocking Afterburn no matter what. If you are playing against a good Glaive, he will be setting you up to be killed early game in the lane. He'll be using this to punch you away from objectives toward his own turret. Just always block Afterburn. It's one of the best and most versatile abilities in the game if you're good with it, and basically a Glaive that hits his Afterburns is an instant win for any team. Grumpjaw's Grumpy ability is an area slow upon the place that he dashes to. I would give this a threat level of 2 out of 10 because honestly, when you're playing against somebody like Grumpjaw, there is something that you really need to be blocking, and it's not Grumpy. It's going to be what's next, which would be Stuffed. So 2 out of 10 for Grumpy. Stuffed is hard crowd control for Grumpjaw, and you get eaten. You need to block this basically every single time. If you don't block this, your team is probably going to lose the fight unless you have a reliable stun. Threat level 10 out of 10. Carry needs to be blocking this because it only hits one person. So basically, always block Stuffed. You have to always block Stuffed. Gwen's Buckshot Bonanza is soft crowd control. It is an area reveal and slow. I gave it a threat level of 5 out of 10 because you really don't need to block this unless you're trying to escape on low health or well, that's really the only reason why you would block this. Really, you should be saving your reflex block for the next ability, Ace's High, is Gren's hard crowd control. Single target stun that moves in a straight line. I give it a threat level of 7 out of 10 because it's particularly dangerous in that it usually sets up for a crowd control chain. If you've ever watched Invincible Armada's Druid play Gwen, his Ace's Highs always set up a crowd control chain, so watch out for that and always block Ace's High if you're the carry. Jewel has a form of hard crowd control in Rocket Leap. It's an area stun on the area that she lands on. I give it a threat level of 7 out of 10 because if you're actually, for some reason, playing against a Jewel, this is actually a big ability that you don't want to be hit by. The carry should be blocking this unless there's more than one person under it, then you might want to use the Crucible. But it's typically a priority for the carry to block Rocket Leap as she typically only goes for one person. Kestrel's active camo is hard crowd control. With it, it's an area stun with burst damage. I gave it a threat level of 7 out of 10 just because of how dangerous it is when combined with her Glimmer Shot or One Shot One Kill. But honestly, the best way to avoid active camo is to not step on it. Just carry Froze with you all the time, but if you're actually going to step on it, there's more than one person in it maybe. The carry should be the one blocking active camo with his reflex block, but if there's like 3 people in it, then the roamer could maybe use his Crucible on it. Koshka's Yummy Catnip Frenzy is hard crowd control, a single target, very long stun of I think 2.2 seconds. I gave this a threat level of 8 out of 10 just because of how good it is when used correctly at isolating a hard target to kill. The carry should always be blocking this with his reflex block as it is single target. Cruel has a form of crowd control that is unique to his perk. It is a heavy slow on contact when he's using Shadows Empower Me. I gave it a threat level of 4 out of 10, not because it isn't dangerous, but because it's continuous damage every time he basic attacks, and it's usually better to just focus on blocking his next skill, which would be the hard crowd control of From Hell's Heart. It's a single target stun and slow that can be variably changed in time depending on how far the sword has traveled. I gave this a threat level of 8 out of 10 because it's very hard to block and it's usually Cruel's finishing move when he wants to go in for a melee kill. Lance has 2 forms of crowd control, and the first one is hard crowd control in Impale. It's an area root mechanism with a straight line in front of Lance where he aims it. I gave it a threat level of 7 out of 10 because while you can basic attack while rooted, it's very disorienting and it usually follows up with some more damage. The carry should be blocking Impale. Next would be his Githian Wall. I gave this one a threat level of 6 out of 10 because it is an area knockback that can stun you against walls. Honestly, block this one if you can, but Lance really likes to spam this all the time whenever he can, so it's not always a death sentence to be hit by this, depending on how good your enemy team is. Next is Lyra's hard crowd control in Bright Bulwark. It's an area snare that stops all heroes or stops all enemies in the vicinity from using dash and movement abilities. I gave this one a threat level of 5 out of 10 because it's very hard to predict and hard to block, and even if you do block it, the initial activation, when your block wears off, you will just be snared again because the duration can be longer than your reflex block. If this hits you, it hits you. There's not really a reason to try to block it, just wait until it wears off and see if you can win the fight from there. Ozo has two forms of crowd control, the first one being soft crowd control with acro bounce. If you didn't know this, I know I didn't before I made this video. Acro bounce actually slows down a little bit the target that you bounced on the head of. Gave it a threat level of 2 out of 10 because there's much more stuff to be, there's much more important things to be blocking when you're playing against Ozo, most of which is Bangarang. Single target stun and knockback, hard crowd control. I gave it a threat level of 7 out of 10 just because it's kind of his finishing move on an escaping target. You shouldn't be using this to initiate, by the way. And the carry should be blocking Bangarang just because of how it is single target. Petal's spontaneous combustion is soft crowd control because of the area slow upon the explosion of her minions. I gave it a threat level of 4 out of 10 because you won't really accomplish that much by blocking this. She usually does it like 2 to 3 times at once if she wants to finish you off. And then there's also usually more important things to block than spontaneous combustion. All 3 of Finn's skills are crowd control, but 2 of them are hard and 1 is soft. So the first one is hard crowd control, and it's going to be Quibble. It's an area stun with heavy crystal damage. I gave it a threat level of 7 out of 10, because if you can't block the hook, block this instead and you will have negated most of the effects of the hook. Next one is going to be soft crowd control, and it's going to be polite company. It's a slight area displacement based on how far you are or close you are to Finn. I gave this a 1 out of 10 because there are so many more important things to block than polite company. Lastly, it's going to be the hook, forced accord, threat level 11 out of 10. You always need to block forced accord because a Finn team is going to be absolutely playing around forced accord, and there's nothing you can do about that. He can use it to finish off fleeing enemies, he can use it to initiate fights. I don't recommend the whole initiating fights thing, but however you want to play Finn, I don't really care. So yeah, forced accord, definitely the biggest priority thing to block with Finn. Always be blocking forced accord. His other skills, you also want to block Quibble, but really don't block, don't block, I can't believe I'm forgetting this, polite company. Don't block polite company unless you're like trying to escape on low health. So Quibble, high priority, forced accord, high priority. That's what we want to talk about for Finn. Rhyme has 2 forms of crowd control, or 3 forms of crowd control, and the first one is in his perk, Frostguard. His basic attacks slightly slow enemies. I gave this a threat level of 1 out of 10 because there are much more important things to block on Rhyme, and his basic attacks are frequent as is, so why would you waste your block on only blocking like 2 of them? Next would be his Chill Winds ability, which roots enemies with the chill effect, meaning they've either been basic attacked by Rhyme or been hit by one of his abilities. I gave this a threat level of 6 out of 10. It is Rhyme's unique ability to keep a carry where he wants, and you should be blocking this if you are a carry. He usually will try to get you on his Winter Spire for the second activation, so predict it then. Lastly is going to be hard crowd control of Vainglory. It's a big area slow with a big stun in the middle. I gave it a threat level of 7 out of 10. Vainglory is a huge slow and an even bigger stun. Make sure you block its impact if you see that you're close to the center. Ringo, believe it or not, actually has 1 form of crowd control, and it comes in the form of Achilles Shot. It's soft crowd control, and it's also a soft slow on a single target. Gave it a threat level of 1 out of 10 because honestly, why would you ever block this when you could just be blocking Hellfire Brew? Now, Hellfire Brew is not crowd control, but it is a ability that you should be reflex blocking. Rona has a form of soft crowd control in her Into the Fray ability, as it ruptures the ground where she lands and causes a slow area for enemies that are walking over it. I gave this a threat level of 0 out of 10 for reasons that you can probably imagine without me needing to explain them. Samuel's Oblivion is hard crowd control. It's an area sleep. I gave this a threat level of 8 out of 10, although it is very telegraphed and has a delayed activation on the ground. The captain should always be blocking this with his crucible, because getting a multiple enemy sleep is basically a finished fight for Samuel. You do not want to be getting slept in the middle of a fight, and Oblivion is easy enough to block that you should just be easily hitting this with your crucible. Unless there might, I don't know, there could be something better to be blocking, but always be looking out for Oblivion. It's pretty telegraphed, so you should be able to get it. Saw's crowd control comes in the form of suppressing fire. It's a very heavy slow, and I gave it a threat level of (?) out of 10. Let me tell you a little bit about suppressing fire. The dangerousness of suppressing fire comes completely from the team you're playing against. Does the enemy Saw suck? Then don't block suppressing fire, just kill him while he's using it. Is the enemy team coordinated and playing around the Saw? Well, then you should probably block and warp treads away immediately when Saw goes into suppressing fire. If the enemy team is good, they will be using the immobility of the Saw to try to bait you into a melee fight with their jungler and roamer, which they will probably win because they've drafted for that. But, however, if the enemy team sucks, just kill Saw when he uses this. He's not that hard to kill if the best Saw is bad, and most Saws are bad. Scarf's Goop is soft crowd control, and it's actually the slowest slow in the entire game, but it's a pretty small area. Now, of course, it's not the slowest slow in the entire game when you activate it, but I gave it a threat level of 4 out of 10 because while it is dangerous, it's damage over time. You should not be trying to block damage over time or burn damage with your reflex block, because reflex block is for blocking one-off abilities that have the potential to hurt you bigly. Sky's Death from Above is a brief stun and a heavy slow. I've given it the title of hard crowd control because of its nature of being a stun and a slow. I gave it a threat level of 7 out of 10, and the carry should be blocking this. A good Sky will set you up for a big, I don't know, she'll close you in with this and subject you to her forward barrage. So it's almost sometimes prudent just to kind of walk through it with your reflex block up, because you'll still be walking at normal speed. So yeah, you should gauge how good the enemy Sky is, and if they are really good, it's worth using your reflex block on Death from Above. Lastly, and finally, we have Vox's hard crowd control of Wait For It. It's an area silence that moves down a straight path. I give this a threat level of (?) out of 10 because honestly, it depends on how good you are and how good the enemies are you're facing. In pro play and Vainglorious level ranked queue, Wait For It can set up for an instant win in a fight, because these players have the reactions and intuition in the game to be able to capitalize on that like 0.7 second silence. People will go in and they will use Wait For It at the exact time that the roamer would be using his like fountain or crucible, and it instantly wins you the fight. But if you're going in like the low tiers, mid tiers, they just, I mean, honestly, they know, I mean, I'm not trying to talk down to anybody or anything, but when I was that tier, I did not even know why Wait For It was a thing. I was like, it's damage. So yeah, that's why I've given it a threat level of (?) out of 10, and I hope you can understand. So thanks for watching my Ultimate Crowd Control Field Guide as of Vainglory 2.4. I hope you enjoyed and learned a lot of useful information about the abilities that are used on the Halcyon Fold. So yeah, that's going to be it for the video, you guys. I know I'm adding this afterwards. I'm pretty sure Vox's Pulse counts as crowd control because of the slight slow that you get when you're affected by it. I'm really sorry that I didn't add that in there, but you can just imagine that I did. If I was to rate Pulse as a threat level, I would give it a 1 out of 10, to be honest. So that's going to be it for this video, you guys. If you have any questions, put it down in the comments below, and I'll try to answer you as soon as I can. Yeah, goodbye.